"Ma'am, are you all right?" The hotel concierge's voice sliced through the marble air like a whisper that knew too much. Isla Kensington didn't answer. Her hand, still clutching her phone, trembled just enough to betray her. She gave a brisk nod and turned on her heels, the sharp click of her stilettos echoing off the gold-veined floor of the Ridgeworth Hotel. Her signature walk, shoulders square, head-high pace controlled, was intact. But her eyes had glossed over storm-tossed and lost behind her flawless makeup. She didn't see the man already inside the elevator. The doors were closing when she slipped through, never looking up. Owen Carter looked up. He didn't flinch, didn't move. He simply shifted his toolbox slightly to the side to make space, not that she'd notice. He had learned to occupy space like a shadow present, necessary unseen. Isla finally exhaled. The elevator doors slid shut with a cushioned sigh. There was silence, not the kind filled with awkwardness. No, this was the rare kind, thick, breathable like velvet drawn over bruised skin. The overhead light glinted off the brass walls, casting soft glows on Isla's cheekbones. Her phone lit up with a new message, but she didn't check it. She blinked rapidly. And then, very quietly, too quietly for a CEO of her stature, she swore under her breath. "Damn it," she whispered. Owen didn't speak, but he shifted again just enough to open the breast pocket of his Navy janitor's jacket and without a word held out a neatly folded handkerchief. White, crisp, worn, but clean. She glanced at it, then at him. Her eyes narrowed not in disdain, but confusion, suspicion almost, like she was seeing something that shouldn't be there, like a piano in the middle of a freeway. "You carry that around?" she asked, voice low but tinged with disbelief. "I work where people spill," Owen said calmly, not looking directly at her. "Not all spills are visible." She hesitated. Then she took the handkerchief. Not like someone accepting help, no more like someone testing if the universe was joking. The elevator kept gliding. "That's poetic," she muttered more to herself. He gave a faint smile. Just practical. The silence returned softer this time, almost friendly. She stared at her reflection in the mirror-lined walls. Mascara was threatening its usual restraint. She dabbed at the corner of her eye with the handkerchief. "You're not supposed to talk to guests, are you?" she asked suddenly, not looking at him. "Not supposed to make a scene either," he replied, and that made her laugh short-breathy, unexpected, like someone who forgot they could. The elevator dinged, her floor. She stepped out, pausing just as the doors began to close behind her. Then, quietly over her shoulder, "Thanks." Owen didn't answer, but as the doors slid shut there was the faintest shift in his expression, something between a nod and a knowing. The next morning, Owen was already on the 18th floor by 6:45 a.m. Mopping, disinfecting, replacing towels in the executive spa hallway. At 7:02 the elevator doors opened. She stepped in, dressed in navy slacks, hair tied back. She saw him. He saw her. He didn't move, she didn't speak, but she didn't press the close button either. She waited. He finished adjusting a trash bin lid and walked in toolbox in hand. The doors closed. Again, silence. But this time it was a silence with memory. "Isla Kensington," she said as if correcting a mistake he hadn't made. "Owen Carter," he replied like it didn't matter if she forgot. Another pause. "People call me the Ice Queen," she said out of nowhere. He didn't respond. She turned slightly, studying him. "Aren't you curious why—" "No," he said casually. That stopped her cold. She blinked. "No," she repeated, almost amused. "Titles stick easier than truth," he said, adjusting his grip on the toolbox. "And I've seen ice. It melts." Isla didn't smile, but something in her shoulders relaxed. The elevator reached the lobby. She stepped out, heels echoing. This time, she didn't look back. That night in her suite on the 48th floor, Isla stared at the handkerchief on her dresser, folded neatly, a ghost of a moment that should have meant nothing, but didn't. Downstairs, Owen returned to the janitor's locker room and removed his jacket. He reached for his backup handkerchief from his bag and tucked it into the pocket of a fresh uniform. Just in case, because sometimes people spill again, and sometimes the silent ride says more than words ever could. By 4:45 a.m., the city was still asleep. But inside the Ridgeworth Hotel, lights flickered on one by one like stage cues in a play no one ever watched. Owen Carter was already on the 12th floor. He moved like he had a rhythm built into his bones. Mop, bucket, rinse, repeat. His steps were silent, practiced. His presence invisible. That was the unspoken rule in places like this. Janitors were part of the wallpaper, seen just enough to be expected, but never long enough to be remembered. Except now, someone had remembered. Her name was Isla Kensington. But Owen didn't let himself think about that too much. There was something sacred about routine. It held him together. After his wife Margaret passed 3 years ago, this job became his metronome. Every streak of the mop, every polished tile was a quiet protest against falling apart. And then there was Emily. His daughter, 9 years old, and made entirely of questions she never asked out loud anymore. She used to be loud. Before the hospital room, before the machines, before the night she held her mother's hand and learned what it meant to say goodbye. Now she whispered, to people, to birds, to books, and sometimes not at all. "Daddy, are you sad every day?" she'd asked once, curled under his arm with her head on his chest like she had as a toddler. Owen didn't answer her right away. Instead, he kissed the top of her hair and said, "I'm something else, kiddo." Something quieter than sad, but still standing. He was standing now outside room 1918, gently knocking. "Housekeeping," he said softly. No answer. He let himself in. No guests, just linens to change and a desk with a wineglass tipped on its side, lipstick faintly smudged along the rim. It reminded him of old poetry books. Of Margaret's laugh echoing through their cramped kitchen in Ohio. Of music that made people cry without understanding why. Owen straightened the furniture, fluffed the pillows, and turned off the television that had been left running. The screen went black, but in its reflection he caught sight of his own face, a face lined by grief and softened by kindness no one asked for. Later that morning, back in the staff lounge, Marcus, the security guard who worked nights, tossed him a protein bar. "You ever sleep, man?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. "Between mops," Owen replied. Marcus chuckled. "Saw you in the elevator yesterday, with the dragon lady herself." Owen paused. "She's not a dragon," he said calmly. Marcus laughed louder this time. "Okay, Romeo. But just be careful. She breathes fire in board meetings. Singed our front desk guy just for calling her Miss." Owen didn't laugh. He just tucked the protein bar in his pocket and nodded once. There was a reason he didn't engage much. People like to put labels on others like price tags in a clearance bin, quick, lazy, and nearly always wrong. By 3:00 p.m., school was out. Owen clocked out and walked 10 blocks to Emily's elementary school. She waited on the steps, hugging her sketchpad like a shield. Her brown curls danced in the wind. "Hey, kiddo," he called. She looked up and smiled, small but genuine, a smile that had to be earned. They walked in silence for a few blocks, her hand tucked into his jacket pocket. "Did you know birds don't blink when they fly?" she asked, eyes still on the sidewalk. "Nope," Owen said. "But I do know most people only see the bird after it lands." Emily looked up at him. "Like you," he paused, then nodded. "Yeah, like me." That night, while she drew pictures of imaginary animals with wings and spectacles, Owen sat at the kitchen table with an old manuscript. A draft. Unfinished. Forgotten. A novel he once started writing when Margaret was alive. He never showed it to anyone. Not even her. Too soft for the world he'd told himself. Too gentle for people who had forgotten how to slow down and listen. But he never threw it away. Now, with Isla Kensington's handkerchief sitting folded neatly beside it, he wondered if the world was still as closed as he thought. Maybe some doors weren't locked. Just quiet. And maybe, just maybe, someone would open one without knowing why. Owen smiled to himself. He got up, turned off the lamp, and whispered, "Good night, Margaret." "She's not coming," the executive assistant whispered, tucking her phone away like a guilty secret. The boardroom fell into a polite tension. Suits shifted. Eyeglasses gleamed. The sun cast long shadows through the high windows of the Ridgeworth's 45th floor, cutting across the marble table like lines drawn in battle. Isla Kensington was 30 minutes late, which by her standards meant something was broken. Or someone. They didn't whisper her name, not really. People didn't whisper hurricanes. They braced for them. When Isla entered a room, conversations died mid-sentence. Men double-checked their ties. Women sat straighter. Assistants scurried like mice clearing crumbs before a hawk arrived. And then she appeared. Door open. No apology. Isla Kensington strode into the room like the air owed her rent. "Let's begin," she said as if time waited for her to arrive. She wore a charcoal suit tailored so sharply it looked like it might cut the table in half if she leaned forward. No jewelry, save for a thin silver watch, stopped at 217. A detail no one noticed. Except her. Q3 shows projected attrition under 2%, she began, which means we're overstaffed. We're also bloated in middle management. 47 roles can be automated or consolidated. A murmur. One brave soul cleared his throat. That's nearly a department. Isla's gaze didn't waver. Departments don't keep lights on. Margins do. The room went still. A young analyst looked up from her notes, eyes flickering with something close to doubt. Isla caught it. She turned, slightly, voice low but firm. "You think profit is cold?" The analyst flinched. Isla leaned forward. "I think layoffs are colder, and if we don't move now, this company won't be here to pay anyone's severance." That was the kind of logic no one wanted to agree with but couldn't argue against. Meeting adjourned. Just like that, another 47 lives became numbers. As the room emptied, Isla remained seated. Alone. She stared at the file in front of her but didn't open it. Instead, her eyes drifted to the skyline beyond the glass. The city pulsed unaware. Cars moved like red blood cells down steel veins. People ordered coffee, laughed, kissed, lived, and she sat there. Perfect posture. Broken silence. A knock at the door. Not her assistant. A waiter. Nervous. He carried a cappuccino on a tray, trembling slightly. "From the cafe downstairs, ma'am," he stammered. "Someone left this with your name on it." She raised an eyebrow. The cup had no name written on it, just a sticky note. For when the silence gets too loud. No signature, no clue. She didn't have to guess. Only one person she knew spoke like that, or didn't speak at all. That night in the private residence suite on the 48th floor, Isla stood barefoot on the balcony watching the city exhale. Her phone buzzed. Mother. She stared at the screen. Didn't pick up, not tonight. Instead, she turned inside. The living room was spotless, designed by someone else, lived in by no one. On the coffee table sat the handkerchief. Still folded, still white. She reached for it, held it like a question. Her thumb ran along the hem, soft, a little frayed. No one had ever handed her something with both hands before. That thought hit her harder than she expected. Isla wasn't born with power. She was adopted into it, sculpted, shaped, polished until she gleamed. "You'll never be seen unless you shine brighter than everyone else," her mother had said on her 13th birthday. "And if you want to lead, Isla, don't let them see you bleed." So she hadn't. Not once. Not until... The elevator. The next morning, Isla pressed the elevator button at exactly 6:58 a.m. The doors slid open. He was already there. Owen Carter. Same uniform, same quiet presence. But this time she didn't look past him. She stepped in, stood beside him. No one else. Just them. The doors closed. A few floors passed in silence. Then softly, "Did you send the coffee?" Owen didn't look at her. Not supposed to bring food past the second floor, but the cafe manager owed me a favor. She turned, slightly studying him. "You're full of favors for someone no one notices." He shrugged. "People notice, they just don't look." That landed. She stared ahead. "Why help me?" she asked finally. There was a pause. Then Owen said, Because I think everyone deserves one moment of being seen, even the people who wear armor so long they forget they're still bleeding under it. Isla exhaled, not sharply, but like someone letting go of something she'd carried too far too long. The elevator dinged. Her floor. But she didn't move. Instead, she asked quietly, vulnerably, impossibly, "Will you be here tomorrow?" Owen looked at her. And, for the first time, really looked. "I clean every morning," he said, "but I'm not hard to find, if you're actually looking." The doors slid open. She stepped out, but this time she turned back and smiled. Just a little. The next morning, Isla didn't take the elevator at 7:00 a.m. She took it at 6:53. The lobby was nearly empty save for the sleepy-eyed concierge and the scent of fresh polish on the marble. The air was still the kind of stillness that comes just before the world stretches awake. She waited. Exactly on time, the elevator opened. Owen Carter was there. He didn't look surprised, but something in the way his posture adjusted ever so slightly told her he noticed. She stepped in. They said nothing, but the silence had changed. It no longer pressed down on them like a weight, it held them together like a shared secret. 3 floors passed. Then Isla broke it. "My father was a piano teacher," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the glowing floor numbers. "He used to say silence was the most powerful note, because it made you listen harder." Owen didn't speak, but the slight shift in his jaw told her he was. "Most people just fill it with noise," she added. "I used to," he finally said, "until I realized most noise is just fear dressed up as control." She turned to him. "What do you fear?" He paused. "Being seen at the wrong moment, by the wrong person." She didn't reply, but she understood. The elevator dinged on the 20th floor. She stepped out without another word. But that evening something unexpected happened. It was her birthday. Not that anyone in the building knew, not that she'd told anyone. Her phone buzzed once at noon, a pre-programmed email from her own assistant reminding her of her age. 32. No cards, no flowers, no dinner reservations. She'd canceled those 2 years ago when her mother had skipped out at the last minute and left her sitting in a 5-star restaurant with a bottle of unopened champagne and the bitter taste of old abandonment. She hadn't celebrated since. That night, Isla returned to her suite late. The door clicked softly behind her as she entered. She slipped off her heels, setting them down beside the wall with mechanical grace. But when she turned toward the kitchenette counter, she froze. There was a small package wrapped in brown paper, neat, not festive. Beside it sat a post-it note with one sentence, "Noticed you hum this in the elevator. Thought you should have the whole thing." She frowned. Then, slowly, carefully, she opened the package. A CD. An original recording of Debussy. Claire de Lune, in vinyl print, slipped into a worn sleeve that looked like it had passed through a dozen different lives before arriving here. Her hand trembled slightly. She hadn't realized she'd been humming it. Hadn't realized anyone had been close enough to notice. She stared at the handwriting. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't planned. But it was human. She sat down on the couch, the CD still in her hand. Isla Kensington, the woman who built billion-dollar strategies in her sleep, couldn't move for a full 5 minutes. Because no one had given her something without expectation in years. It wasn't expensive. But it was exact, thoughtful, and it wrecked her. The next morning, she didn't wait for the elevator. She found him, downstairs, in the maintenance hall behind the ballroom. He was refilling a cart with soap and mop heads, his sleeves rolled up. There was a calm to his movement, a quiet respect for even the mundane. "You left something in my suite," she said. He turned. "Didn't flinch." "Guilty," Owen said. "You broke protocol," she added, but her voice had no bite. "I know," he said simply. She held up the CD. This wasn't a gesture. It was a mirror. Owen looked at her, puzzled. "You saw me," she explained. "Not the version I've built. Not the version people want. Just me. And you knew exactly what note I was playing even when I didn't." There was silence again. He broke it this time. You hum in F major when you're tense, but you switch to a minor when you think no one's listening. She blinked. You studied music. I studied people, he said. Music just helped me hear them better. Her expression softened. I didn't think I could still be heard, she whispered. Most people don't, Owen said, until someone listens. She looked down at the CD in her hand. You're not what you seem. Neither are you. That made her smile. Not the PR smile, not the polite one, but the kind that felt like an exhale. I have a meeting in 10 minutes, she said. Owen nodded. Then, don't keep the dragons waiting. She hesitated, then said, They don't scare me. Not like silence used to. He tilted his head. Then, maybe you're learning how to play your own melody again. She stepped back toward the elevator. But before the doors closed behind her, she turned. Thank you, she said, for reminding me I still have notes left. And then she was gone. Owen stood still for a long moment after. Then, with a slight smile, he returned to restocking the soap. Because sometimes the quietest acts make the loudest echoes. The fire alarm went off at 8:17 p.m. It wasn't a blaring scream, but a rhythmic pulse soft enough not to incite panic, loud enough to make people stop mid-sentence and glance up. Isla Kensington had just closed her laptop. She didn't flinch at the sound. She rarely did. Instead, she stood from the mahogany desk in her suite and walked to the door with calm precision. She knew the system, every protocol, every staircase, every contingency. She had personally overseen the safety audits for the Ridgeworth's corporate wing. But when the elevator dinged open in the lobby, something unexpected caught her eye. A child. Alone. Knees pulled to chest arms wrapped tightly around them, hiding her face. She sat in the corner of the marble corridor just past the concierge desk, her small body trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. Guests walked past murmuring. No one stopped. No one knew what to do. A manager whispered urgently to a bellboy, "She's probably with a guest. Go check room 2021. But Isla didn't move with them. She moved toward the girl. She crouched slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. No words. Just presence. That's what the moment needed. The girl, no more than 9, had dark curly hair and wore a little yellow sweater that looked 2 sizes too big. Her sneakers were scuffed. One of the laces was missing. Isla knelt beside her and placed a hand gently on the floor, not touching the child but grounding herself. "I'm not here to talk," she whispered, voice low. "Just to sit." The girl didn't respond, not even a twitch. But Isla didn't move. 5 full minutes passed. Then, slowly, the girl shifted just slightly so her shoulder brushed Isla's arm. It wasn't contact, but it was permission. Another minute. Then a whisper. So soft, Isla almost thought she imagined it. "Where's my dad?" Isla blinked. She didn't have an answer. But she said the one thing she wished someone had said to her when she was that age. "I won't leave you." The girl turned her head just enough for Isla to glimpse her tear-streaked cheek and wide, terrified eyes. That's when Isla saw it. The small pin on the girl's collar. A name tag, handwritten, laminated. Emily Carter, and suddenly, the pieces clicked. Owen. This was his daughter. 10 minutes later, Owen came running through the staff corridor, panic sharp in his eyes. He nearly collided with the assistant manager who pointed toward the lobby. "She's safe. Some guest found her. We thought she was with a wedding party." Owen barely heard the rest. He saw them before he turned the corner, his daughter curled into the side of a woman in a tailored pantsuit and bare feet, the fire alarm still blinking quietly behind them. Isla looked up the moment she heard his steps. "I think she's waiting for you," she said. Owen exhaled the kind that empties your lungs and your soul in one go. "Emily," he whispered, dropping to his knees. She looked up, eyes glassy. "I didn't know where you were," she said, voice trembling. "I know, sweetheart." "I'm sorry," Owen said, pulling her into his arms. "I should have been faster." She held on tightly, her fingers gripping the back of his shirt like it was the only solid thing in the world. Isla stood slowly, giving them space, but Owen looked up, and their eyes met. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, voice low. "You already did," Isla replied softly. "You taught her to trust a stranger." Owen blinked. "That wasn't me." Isla tilted her head. "Wasn't it?" Emily, still wrapped in her father's arms, mumbled, "She didn't talk. She just stayed." Owen looked at Isla, his expression unreadable. "She's not usually okay with people. Not since—" He cut himself off. Isla didn't press. She simply nodded. "That's all right," she said. "I'm not usually okay with people either." There was silence. Then gently, Isla turned to Emily. "Can I tell you a secret?" she asked. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "When I was your age, I used to hide in closets when I was scared. I didn't want anyone to see me cry. I thought if I cried quietly enough, the fear would go away faster." Emily looked at her, studying her the way only children can, without judgment, only curiosity. "Did it?" she asked. Isla smiled, sad and honest. "No. But when someone finally opened the door and sat beside me, it didn't feel so heavy." Emily nodded, a slow, serious nod. Then she did something Isla didn't expect. She reached out. Tiny fingers touched the edge of Isla's sleeve, just a brush, nothing more. But it said everything. "I should get her home," Owen said, rising. "Course," Isla replied. He hesitated. Do you take coffee?" She blinked, startled. "Excuse me. I mean," he said, clearing his throat, "if you ever want to talk, or sit in silence. I make decent coffee. At home. French press." She stared at him for a second too long. "Then that's probably against 5 different HR policies." He smiled. "Good thing I'm not in HR." She almost laughed. Almost. Then she looked at Emily, now calm fingers still clutching her dad's shirt. "You have a good teacher," she said. Owen followed her gaze. "No, I just have a reason." And with that, he nodded, took his daughter's hand, and walked away. Isla stood still long after they disappeared down the hall. Her eyes drifted to the little corner where Emily had been curled, and, for the first time in years, she whispered her own name out loud. To no one, just to remember how it sounded. The invitation came on a napkin. Not a phone call, not an email. A napkin, creased and slightly damp in one corner with 4 words written in neat block letters. Lobby Cafe. 7:30 a.m. Hila found it slipped under her suite door. No signature, no message, just that simple request. She knew who it was from, and she went. Not because she wanted coffee, because for the first time in a long time she wanted company. She arrived 5 minutes early. Owen was already seated at a corner table dressed in civilian clothes, a flannel shirt, dark jeans, and boots that looked like they had walked through more than a few winters. A steaming mug sat in front of him. Black, no sugar, no cream. Isla hesitated, then sat. No handshake, no pleasantries. Just 2 people sitting across from each other pretending it wasn't strange. "You drink coffee like someone who trusts the bitterness," she said. Owen looked up, smiled faintly. Better than pretending it's sweet. A waitress approached, pen in hand. "I'll have the same," Isla said before the woman could speak. Owen raised an eyebrow. "Didn't peg you for a black coffee person." She shrugged. "Didn't peg you for a poetry-reading janitor. Touché." The coffee arrived, and for a while they just sat. The hotel lobby moved around them, suitcases rolled past a toddler, screamed somewhere near the elevators. 2 executives argued about numbers with plastic smiles, but their table remained still, like a pause in the music. "I wasn't always this," Owen said, finally motioning toward himself. "Neither was I." Isla replied. "I used to teach at a university in Ohio. Literature, philosophy." She blinked. "Seriously?" He nodded. "Had a desk, a tweed blazer, the whole cliché. What happened?" Owen's fingers traced the rim of his mug. "My wife got sick. We sold the house, moved closer to a specialist in New York. Insurance didn't cover half of it. I started working nights, anything I could get. She passed 9 months later." A pause. "She died with her hand in mine. I stopped teaching the next day." Isla didn't speak. Because some silences are too sacred to fill. I kept this job, he added, voice softer now. Because it gave me just enough to raise Emily, and because mopping a floor is something grief can't argue with. Another pause, then he looked at her. And you? What did you used to be before you became… Kensington. She smiled, not unkindly. A foster kid. Bounced through 6 homes before I was 10, he didn't flinch. Evelyn Kensington adopted me when I was 12. She was cold, brilliant, terrifying, but she taught me 2 things: how to win and how not to need anyone. He nodded slowly. Sounds lonely. It is, she admitted. But loneliness is predictable. People aren't. That's where you're wrong, he said quietly. Loneliness is the most unpredictable thing in the world. It makes you see threats in kindness and ghosts in mirrors. She stared at him, stunned by the accuracy of that sentence. He sipped his coffee. That's from Neruda, I think. Or maybe I made it up. Ela laughed. A real one this time. Unpolished. Human. Owen leaned back in his chair, watching her. You laugh like someone who hasn't done it in a while, he said. I laugh like someone who forgot she still could. She replied. Their eyes met. Something shifted. Not romantic, not yet, but recognition. 2 people who'd been walking through fog finally catching sight of someone else's lantern. You're good with Emily, she said after a beat. She teaches me more than I teach her. She's strong. She's broken, he said, but she's learning to carry the cracks with grace. That's beautiful, he shrugged. That's parenting. There was a moment of quiet. Then Isla asked, Do you miss the classroom? Sometimes, he said. But I think the world needs teachers everywhere, even in elevators, even in silence. She nodded slowly, then looked down at her coffee. This isn't terrible, she said. It grows on you, he replied. She smiled. So does the company. He looked up at her, eyes kind but knowing. Why did you really come this morning? She paused, considered deflecting. But then she said, Because someone saw my daughter scared and didn't ask questions. Just stayed. She's not your daughter, he said gently. No, Isla admitted. But for 10 minutes she was the only thing in the world that mattered. That's how it starts, he said. Another long look. Then Isla reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table. Owen opened it. It was a flyer. Community Literacy Night. Volunteers needed. Emily's school, she said. They're hosting an event. Parents read to the class. He looked at the paper, then back at her. She asked me to ask you, Isla added. Owen smiled. Let me guess. She wants poetry. She wants dragons. But I figured you could do both. He laughed. I'll be there, he said. She stood. He stood too. No handshake, but this time when she left, she turned back. Thank you for the coffee. Anytime, Owen said. Then she was gone, and he was left with 2 empty mugs, and a feeling he hadn't had in years. Hope. The call came at exactly 10:00 p.m. Isla was brushing her hair in front of the mirror, wearing an oversized sleep shirt and no makeup, just a woman for once. Not a weapon. Her phone vibrated on the nightstand. One word on the screen. Mother. Not Mom. Not Evelyn. Just Mother. She stared at it for a beat, then answered. Her mother's voice came through, clipped and composed like a woman giving orders in a war room. I saw the community board photo. No greeting, no context. Good evening to you too, Isla said dryly. Don't be glib. You're in the background of a public school flyer, with a janitor. So that's what this was. I'm volunteering at a literacy night, Isla replied. The scandal, he's not your kind. There it was. Isla took a deep breath. And what exactly is my kind? Mother Evelyn Kensington didn't hesitate. Educated, strategic, ruthless when necessary. You weren't born into this world, Isla. I spent years sculpting you into it. Don't throw it away for a janitor with poetic eyes. Isla's grip on the phone tightened. You always said the only rule was win quietly, bleed privately. That's what I'm doing. You're bleeding publicly. There was silence. Then Evelyn's voice dropped lower. I didn't rescue you from group homes and playground fights so you could get distracted by men who don't belong in our orbit." Hila stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the city. "You didn't rescue me," she said. "You rebranded me." That stung. She could feel the shift on the other end of the line. "I built your name," Evelyn said. "The Kensington name." "I'm not sure that's the one I want anymore." Another pause. "I see," Evelyn said coolly. "Then I'll make this simple. If you continue this involvement, I'll initiate a vote with the board to suspend your control. You know they'll listen to me. You would sabotage your own daughter. I would protect my legacy." There it was. Not love, not concern. Just legacy. Isla's voice was calm but steel-lined. "Then let's be honest, Mother. I'm not your daughter. I'm your investment," Evelyn said. "But investments don't get emotional." The line went dead. Isla stood there, phone still in hand, chest rising and falling like a storm was brewing in her rib cage. She didn't cry, but her hand trembled. The next morning she arrived at the hotel cafe 20 minutes early. Owen wasn't there. She ordered his usual anyway, black coffee, no sugar, and waited. When he arrived, he looked surprised to see both cups on the table. "Didn't peg you for early. Didn't peg you for late," she shot back. He sat, studied her face. "You didn't sleep? No. Want to talk about it? No. Want to pretend everything's fine?" She looked at him. "Yes." "Okay," he said simply. "How about the weather?" She almost smiled. Then the silence between them stretched, not awkward but taut. Finally she broke. "My mother threatened to strip my board power if I keep seeing you." Owen's fingers paused around his cup. "Well," he said slowly, "that's one way to start a morning. She thinks I'm embarrassing the Kensington name. And what do you think?" Isla stared into her coffee like it held all the answers. "I think I've spent my whole life climbing ladders only to realize they're leaning against the wrong wall." He let that sink in, then leaned forward. "You know what scares people like your mother?" he asked. "Coffee stains on marble." He smiled. "People who walk away from the power they were told they needed and still manage to stand taller." She looked up at him. "What if I fall?" Owen didn't blink. "Then I'll sit beside you until you're ready to stand again." Her throat tightened. "Why do you do that?" she whispered. "Do exactly what I needed to hear before I know I needed it." He shrugged. "You listen like someone who's never been listened to. Makes it easy to know what matters." She looked away. "You should be a writer." He sipped his coffee. "Too many typos. Besides, life gives better stories than I could ever make up." Another pause. Then Owen reached into his satchel and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. He slid it across the table. She opened it slowly. It was a first-edition paperback of The Velveteen Rabbit. Well worn. Underlined in soft pencil, a handwritten inscription on the inside cover. "To Margaret, when you're real, you never have to be perfect." Isla ran her fingers over the words. "My wife's favorite book," Owen said. She used to say it reminded her that being loved wasn't about earning it, just letting yourself be seen. "Why give this to me? Because I think you've been trying to be real your whole life. You just never had anyone tell you that you already are." Isla closed the book. Her hands trembled just a little. "Thank you," she said, "for the coffee, for sitting with me in the dark. Even when you didn't ask why it was dark in the first place." He nodded. Then, quietly, Owen reached out not across the table but beside it and lightly brushed her pinky finger with his. Just enough to say, "You're not alone." They didn't say anything more, but they didn't need to, because the most powerful revolutions often begin in whispers. And in coffee shops at 7:30 a.m., the first time Emily found the manuscript, it was by accident. She had been looking for tape. Her father kept the utility drawer in the kitchen impossibly neat, batteries aligned, rubber bands sorted by size, pencils sharpened to soldierly precision. But tucked beneath a folder marked Taxes 2021, she found a stack of yellowing pages bound by a black clip. Typed, double-spaced, softly creased along the corners as if someone had flipped them hundreds of times and then never again. No title, just a name in the corner, Carter. Owen. Draft. Emily didn't read the whole thing, not right away. She read a paragraph, then another and another, then she stopped, because there were parts of it that felt too much like him, too raw, too quiet, too real. That night, as Owen did the dishes, she brought the stack into the living room and sat on the carpet in front of the couch the way she used to when Margaret read to her. "Dad," she said, holding the pages up like an artifact. "What's this?" Owen glanced at the title page and immediately froze. He didn't move for a beat. "Then, that's nothing. Just something I started years ago. Why didn't you finish it?" she asked. He dried his hands on a dish towel, walked over, and sat down beside her. His voice was quiet, because the world didn't seem like it needed stories like that anymore. Emily frowned. Stories like what soft ones? Ones where people don't shout to be heard, where healing takes time and love doesn't come with fireworks but with presence. She looked down at the pages again. "I think it's beautiful," she said. "It sounds like Mom." Owen didn't speak. Instead, he reached over and gently brushed a lock of hair from her forehead. "You've got her honesty," he said, "the kind that doesn't ask permission." Emily studied him for a moment. Then, "You should finish it." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sweetheart, I'm a janitor who reads poetry on coffee breaks." She stared at him like he'd just said the most absurd thing in the world. "So," he blinked. "So, that's not exactly the profile of a best-selling author." She folded her arms. "Do you think authors start as authors? No. They start as people who feel something too big to keep inside?" Owen chuckled. "You sound like your mother." "I am my mother," she declared, "and I think you're afraid." He looked at her, caught off guard. Emily's voice softened. "But it's okay to be afraid, Dad. Just don't let it be louder than your story." The room fell still, and Owen, who had spent years hiding his words behind mop buckets and elevator silence, suddenly realized. She was right. 2 days later, Owen brought the manuscript to the cafe. He laid it gently on the table in front of Isla, who raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" she asked, her fingers brushing the pages like they were made of glass. "A story I never finished," he said. "But someone reminded me it still matters." She began to read, slowly, carefully, as if each sentence carried weight. It did. Every line felt like an echo of the man who sat across from her, quiet but vivid, bruised but brave. There were metaphors tucked between mundane scenes, heartache hidden inside ordinary gestures. Love expressed not in declarations but in the way a character always made tea for someone else before pouring his own cup. "I wasn't expecting this," Isla said after a while. "No one was." "It's stunning," she whispered, heartbreaking and kind at the same time. Owen shrugged. "It's just a story." "No," she said, eyes steady on his. "It's you that I landed." He didn't speak for a long moment. Then quietly, "I didn't think anyone wanted soft stories anymore." "I do," Isla said. "And I think the world does too. It just forgot." Owen looked down at his hands. "I used to write when Margaret was in chemo, at night, on the floor beside her bed. She never read it. I don't think she ever knew I was writing." "She knew," Isla said softly. "Women always know when they're being loved." Even silently, he smiled. A tired, grateful smile. Then Isla looked at him carefully. "Would you let me help you finish it?" He blinked. You're not exactly the sit still and edit pages type." She shrugged. "Maybe I've been climbing the wrong mountain. Maybe this is the kind of empire I want to build now, one that leaves people better, not just richer." He watched her, and for the first time he saw it clearly. Not the armor, not the titles, just Isla. The woman who stayed silent beside a child in crisis. The woman who noticed his music. The woman who saw stories worth saving. "I'd like that," he said. "More than I can say." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing the edge of the manuscript. "Then let's finish it," she said. "Together." That night in his tiny apartment, Owen opened his laptop for the first time in months. Emily sat beside him, curled up with a blanket and a bowl of popcorn. "What's the first scene?" she asked. He stared at the blinking cursor, then smiled. The part where he meets someone, who makes him believe in softness again. Emily grinned. "That's a good beginning," she said. Owen nodded and started typing. The boardroom was colder than usual, not in temperature but in tone. The kind of cold that didn't come from air vents but from polished words and carefully constructed silences. The glass walls shimmered with the early morning light, but no one dared look out. Eyes stayed fixed on tablet spreadsheets and one woman. Isla Kensington sat at the head of the table, perfect posture, impeccable gray suit, a pen between her fingers that she hadn't used in the last 20 minutes. Across from her sat Evelyn, regal, crisp, diamond brooch glinting under the recessed lighting like a warning flare. "Before we begin," Evelyn said, voice smooth as glass, "I want to remind everyone that this room exists to protect the brand, and feelings, while interesting, have no legal standing." Isla said nothing. The CFO cleared his throat. "We've reviewed Isla's latest adjustments to the restructuring proposal. She's recommending the company halt the second wave of layoffs and reallocate funds to internal development mentorship programs, wellness support, tuition, reimbursement." He paused. "It's unorthodox." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "It's naive." Isla finally spoke. "It's human." The room shifted, just slightly, a flicker of discomfort. "You're proposing we invest in morale over margin," Evelyn said. "I'm proposing we invest in people," Isla replied. Evelyn leaned forward, voice sharpening. "People don't keep companies alive, numbers do." Isla didn't flinch. "No, mother. People are the company. The numbers just follow them." A silence spread tight, pulsing. The legal advisor glanced around nervously. "May I remind everyone, this board is bound by majority vote." "Call the vote," Evelyn said. But before the motion could proceed, Isla stood. "I'm not asking for permission," she said. "I'm asking for perspective." She looked around the room, eyes meeting each member. "When I was 12, I was adopted out of the foster system. I didn't know which fork to use or how to dress for dinner. I was terrified of making noise in a house that had been silent too long. And Evelyn taught me how to climb." She turned to her mother. "You taught me to be sharp, unapologetic, efficient, but you also taught me to survive in a world where kindness was considered weakness." Isla turned back to the board. "Today, I'm not here to survive. I'm here to build something that lasts, and fear-based leadership never does." Evelyn stood slowly. "If you continue down this path, Isla, you will lose control of this company. You'll become a cautionary tale in a Harvard case study." Isla looked at her, then let them study me. The silence cracked like a dropped plate. One board member, a woman named Helen, lifted her hand. "I vote in favor of Isla's plan." Another followed, then another. "Not everyone, but enough." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, not in rage but in recognition. The tide had shifted, control was slipping, and Isla didn't try to stop it. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to win a war. She was trying to build peace. The vote concluded. Isla's plan passed. Not by much, but enough to matter. Evelyn stood, tall lips pursed. "You're making a mistake," she said. Isla gave her a long look. "No," she said quietly. "I'm just choosing a different story." That evening she didn't go home. She went to the cafe. Owen was already there. He looked up from a tattered paperback and saw something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Relief. Exhaustion. Freedom. She slid into the chair across from him and didn't say anything for a while. Finally she whispered, "I lost today." He tilted his head. "Didn't sound like it. I lost control. I lost certainty. I lost the illusion that I could please her and still be myself." Owen set down his book. "Sounds like you found something better." She blinked at him. "Like what yourself?" She laughed quietly. "That's such a you answer. It's the only one I have." She looked at him more grateful than she could say. "I made a choice in that room," she said, "to stop surviving and start living." Owen nodded. "That's the bravest kind of rebellion." She leaned back in her chair looking at him like someone finally breathing again. "And now? He said you write the next chapter. She smiled, and he smiled back. No applause, no headlines, just two people sharing silence, the kind that feels like a beginning. The suite was already packed. Boxes lined the marble floors labeled in Isla's sharp handwriting. Files, personal books, don't throw. The view from the 48th floor hadn't changed, but Isla had. She stood by the window barefoot, watching the city blink to life beneath her one last time. The room felt hollow, but not in a sad way. More like an echo after a concert, and something beautiful had happened here. But it wasn't meant to last. She had resigned officially that morning, voluntarily, with a calm voice and a signed letter. She wasn't pushed out. She walked out on her own terms. Evelyn hadn't spoken to her since. There was no grand confrontation, no last stab, just silence, which strangely hurt more than the sharpness ever had. Isla exhaled a long, quiet breath that felt like she was peeling off 20 years of armor. Her fingers trembled slightly as she sealed the last box. Her gaze fell on the only object she hadn't packed, the velveteen rabbit, still on the nightstand, still open to the inscription from Owen's late wife. When you are real, you don't mind being hurt. She ran her thumb over the words. Then the doorbell rang. She wasn't expecting anyone. Isla opened the door cautiously, and there stood Emily, alone, wearing her favorite yellow sweater and holding a small folded piece of paper in both hands like it was sacred. "Hi," the girl said shyly. Isla blinked. "Emily." "Are you okay?" Emily nodded. "Dad's downstairs. He let me come up first." Isla opened the door wider. "Of course. Come in." Emily walked in slowly, her sneakers squeaking just slightly on the polished floor. "I wanted to give you something," she said, holding out the paper. Isla took it. It was soft, warm from the girl's palms. She unfolded it carefully. At the top was a crayon drawing, childish but beautiful, of 3 stick figures sitting together. One big one, small, and a woman with long hair. Beneath it, in careful handwriting, were words that made Isla's throat tighten. "Daddy said, you don't need to be loud to change a life. I think you changed his." And beneath that, a second note. Written not in Emily's handwriting, but Owen's. "There are 2 kinds of power in this world, the kind that makes people fear you, and the kind that makes them feel safe." Isla sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, still holding the note. She didn't speak. Couldn't. Because in that moment, more than all the boardrooms, all the applause, all the polished speeches, this quiet crayon-drawn offering meant more. It was the loudest truth she had ever been handed. Emily stood in front of her, nervous now. "Do you like it?" Isla looked up, eyes glassy. "Sweetheart, this is the most important letter I've ever read." Emily smiled shyly and reached out her hand. Isla took it. Just then, Owen appeared in the doorway. He didn't step inside, just leaned against the frame as if waiting for something unspoken. Isla stood, walked over, met his eyes. "This is goodbye, isn't it?" she asked, voice steady but quiet. Owen studied her. "No," he said gently. "It's a beginning. You're just leaving the tower, not the story." She nodded. "It feels strange. Not knowing what comes next. That's where the good chapters live," he said, "in the part you can't control." Isla smiled, small and soft. "I want to build something that breathes," she said, "not just functions. A space for people who never felt safe in rooms like the one I ruled." "You will," Owen said, "because you already are." Emily chimed in from behind him. "Can I help too?" Isla knelt and touched her cheek. "You already did." They stood there for a while, just 3 people in a half-packed room. No titles, no suits, just presence. Before they left, Isla handed the note back to Emily. "Keep it for me," she asked. Emily tilted her head. "Why? So I don't forget where the real power is." Emily grinned and tucked it into her pocket. And as they walked out, Isla turned back to glance at the suite one last time. It was no longer a throne. It was just a room, and outside that room a life was finally waiting. The bell over the door chimed softly. Not with the sharp ring of a storefront, but with the gentle cadence of something beginning again. Isla looked up from behind the counter, her sleeves rolled up, her hands dusted with flour. The cafe smelled like cinnamon and old books. Sunlight poured through the windows in the warm streaks, illuminating handwritten signs, mismatched mugs, and a wall of gently worn novels that whispered stories even when no one was reading them. "Welcome to Chapter and Cup," she called with a smile. A woman in her 50s stepped in, glancing around with a kind of reverence usually reserved for cathedrals. "Is it always this quiet?" she asked. Isla chuckled. "Only until 3 p.m. That's when the kids come in for story hour." The woman nodded, exhaling slowly. "It feels kind." "That's the idea," Isla said. "Coffee's free for first-timers, so are conversations if you want one." The woman blinked, almost startled by the generosity. "Thank you," she whispered, as if afraid speaking too loudly might break the spell. Isla watched her settle into a corner seat, then turned back to the espresso machine. It had been 6 months since she left the tower. 6 months since the boardroom battles, the guarded smiles, the skyline office that looked like success but never felt like it. Now she stood behind a counter built by hand-serving strangers and listening to their stories. And for the first time in her life, she felt real. "Is the kettle on?" came a familiar voice from the back door. Owen stepped in, carrying a stack of second-hand books under one arm and a paint-stained wooden sign under the other. He wore a denim apron over his t-shirt, the sleeves pushed back to reveal forearms strong from work and gentle from healing. Always, Isla said, already reaching for a mug she knew was his favorite, deep navy blue with a chip on the handle. He set the books down, glanced around, and smiled. "Full house," he said. "Word gets around when kindness is served warm," she replied. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "You're different." "I'm me," she said, for the first time. He nodded. "I got something," Owen added, reaching into his bag. He handed her a stack of pages, typed, printed, bound with a soft blue ribbon. Her eyes widened. "You finished it." He smiled, boyish and proud. "The Weight of Quiet. Final draft." She ran her fingers over the title. "I want to host the launch here," he said. "Small. Just us. Some neighbors. And maybe the girl who gave me permission to write again. She already has a spot by the window," Isla said. As if on cue, the door opened again. Emily rushed in wearing a backpack and a grin too big for her face. She beelined to the counter holding up a drawing. "It's us," she announced. "In the cafe. You're making coffee and Dad's reading, and I'm dancing because someone spilled whipped cream again." Isla burst into laughter. "You've got my nose all wrong." Emily shrugged. "It's art, not science." She hopped onto the bar stool as Owen leaned over her shoulder to examine the masterpiece. "You forgot the broom," he teased. Emily rolled her eyes. "You always say you don't mop dreams." "I stand corrected," Owen said, bowing slightly. The three of them stayed like that for a moment, framed in sunlight, surrounded by stories and steam and soft jazz humming through the ceiling speakers. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was whole. A life rebuilt not by grand gestures but by gentle persistence, by showing up, by choosing people over power. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and the cups had been washed, Isla stood behind the counter, wiping down the surface as Owen flipped the closed sign. He walked over, set a teacup beside her, and nodded toward the chairs near the window. "Sit with me," he said. She did. They sat in silence, watching the streetlights flicker on. Then Isla whispered, "Do you think I made the right choice?" Owen didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, and then, quietly, "You stopped asking who you had to be, and became who you already were." Isla blinked. Her throat tightened. "That's the most terrifying thing I've ever done," she admitted. "And the bravest," he said. "You left the elevator." She tilted her head. "What do you mean you could have stayed in that glass box your whole life? Moving up, moving down, always polished, always confined." He turned toward her, eyes steady. "But you chose the door." Tears welled up soft and slow. She didn't wipe them away. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For sitting beside me in the silence. before I even knew how to ask for company. Owen reached over, took her hand. Not with passion, with peace. And in that moment, Isla Kensington, the girl who had once been silent, the woman who had once ruled from towers, finally understood what it meant to belong, not to a place, not to a title, but to herself. And in the cafe between worlds where coffee met conversation and stories met second chances, she began again. No act of kindness is ever small, and sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply stay. And sometimes all it takes is a moment of quiet, a stranger's kindness, or the courage to walk through a different door to change everything. We hope this story touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. We're building a global family of listeners, one story at a time. And tell us, what part of this story stayed with you the most? If this story gave you even a little bit of hope, healing, or a reason to smile today, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that speaks to your heart. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and never stop believing in quiet miracles.